I would not be surprised if you say that you're not impressed with this performance. It is a normal reaction to every person that I had shown this video to. The question here is this a dead end? How far can we go with using machines to replicate, mimic human behavior, and specifically communication behavior? What can help? And I think we should come back again to that question of thinking about instance when you get the mail and you can't read it. When we are trying to understand artificial intelligence through mimicking communication behavior, it becomes fundamentally important to try to take into account element of resonance. Why am I saying these words? Because I want them to resonate in you so that we can interact with each other. The key word being interaction, understanding, resonance. Because of it, I would like to focus a little bit more on the idea of resonance and introduce a background to it. The word resonance comes from the tradition of Vedic perspective, where communication is really about group identities. It's about interpreting elements and signals in the world around us in a way that is consistent with the place, culture, knowledge that we grow up with, that we are surrounded with. And resonance is central and important in a lot of social studies. What are some of the examples where resonance is important, when communication really has to happen through resonance? We see this a lot in art, for example. One of the examples could be theater, where we are asked to interpret certain behaviors, certain interactions that we see. Sometimes if it's a mime theater, we have to make an extra effort to interpret it. If it's a theater that comes from the tradition that is not necessarily traditional and common in particular culture that you are part of, then it becomes really difficult to interpret it. But this is where communication really depends on resonance. Our surroundings, interior design, for example, is another good example. It sends particular message about individuals, about place, space, for that matter. And we usually, when we look at it, we are forced to interpret it, whether we want it or not. It determines our mood, our perception, our understanding of what is happening. Another good example is music. Depending on genre, depending on pace, tempo, pitch, all of these are elements that are can be interpreted, are interpreted in a lot of different ways by a lot of different individuals. So again, understanding of music, communicating with music depends on resonance, depends on how well we can interpret and understand the message. Another good one is advertisement. These we see all the times. Advertisements are encouraging us to interpret metaphors, to see beyond the literal meaning of an image that is presented to us. And success of this type of campaign would depend on how well and it resonates with audiences and how well they can interpret what is being presented to them. Depending on different cultures, some major international advertisers change particular elements of advertising, whether they are airing the advertisement in Asia or Europe or Australia or other countries. All of these interpretations are a function of culture. And in order for it to resonate, it has to match the cultural expectations. Good example of this necessary component of interpretation and communication are also visual illusions. For example, it is hard for us because it's culturally familiar, and we are familiar with both elements, a rabbit and a dog, to decide, make a decision whether we're looking at a duck or a rabbit right now. It's very hard to stop not seeing one or the other. This is an example of a puzzle, but at the same time, it's also an example that our culturally determined expectations about shapes and features are struggling at this point to make a decision, to tell our brain what is it that we're actually looking at. Here is another one. Can you tell where the dot is? Is it inside the box or outside the box? Again, we're constantly struggling. We can't make a decision. Take some time, take a look at it. And in a minute or two, you will be struggling too. Can you do it? There you go. So again, an example of expectation being set, right? And it's really hard for us to decide between the foreground and background because we are used to seeing things in a particular way. And in this case, both of them are presented at the same time. Here is one more. This is clever use of space and our ability to ignore a situation and context and focus on culturally expected, learned traditions that lead us to believe that the object that we see is three-dimensional. And every time I show it to my students, we always contemplate how many accidents this particular track may have caused. It's kind of dangerous when you start looking at it. Initially, even if you're aware of it, it's hard to ignore this three-dimensional feel of the bottle falling out of a truck. So again, examples where resonance is important, understanding is important, and we do use this element of interpretation in communication when we try to, when we receive information or send information. So it is especially important also when we're trying to mimic human behavior, again coming back to the idea that communication is central to it, and this is exactly what IBM approached and how IBM started thinking about it when they tried to produce intelligent computer program that could interact and play Jeopardy. Take a look.